Hey, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining our monthly Money Life webinar. I'm Jim Allen, President and Chief Financial Planner here at Anchor Bay Capital. So tonight we're going to talk about developing your elder care plan. So whether this is caring for aging parents or considering your own personal elder care plan, we're going to talk about a lot of the issues that pertain to aging and what you need to have in place in terms of your financial planning. So what are we going to talk about tonight? So we've got a lot of things that go into an elder care plan. Probably one of the biggest issues is like, okay, where am I going to live? And do I want to age in place? Things like that. And then we're going to talk about healthcare costs, the cost of long-term care, the cost of home health care. How do we finance all of those healthcare costs? And then finally, putting together your personalized elder care plan so that everything's in place and running smoothly. So next slide. There we go. All right, so we're going to start with probably the biggest issue, working, in the elder care plan. So is where will I live? We're going to talk a lot about housing in retirement in your elder years. Then we're going to talk about how will I pay for my health care? Who's going to take care of me when I can't? That's always a big issue. What's going to be your support plan, your support network? And then finally, we need to look at your estate documents to make sure that your estate plan is fully up to date and have that dialed in place, everything communicated before you get to a situation where maybe you can't make changes. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about living arrangements in retirement because this is always kind of the one that most people are concerned about. So, you have a lot of choices. And when I'm talking about retirement, I'm not necessarily talking about right when you first retire. I'm talking about in your later years, your 70s and your 80s, maybe your 90s, et cetera. So you've got a bunch of options. What most people want to do is stay in their current home, essentially aging in place. That's usually the goal for a lot of people. For example, I'll just talk a little bit about my in-laws. They're 94 years old. They still live on their own. They probably shouldn't, but they're fiercely independent and kind of stubborn, and they're not willing to go into living arrangements that are probably more suitable given their stage of life and their health situation. They want to stay there. Essentially, the way they phrase it, they want to stay there until they both pass away. Probably not feasible, but that's a goal of a lot of people. The next one obviously is, okay, at some point, I've got this big house. It's got multiple bedrooms. It's, you got upstairs living accommodations. I can't really live here. And so then what you do is you sell and you trade down to a smaller house, maybe one that's all on one story, that's more suited to, an elderly population. Maybe you've got a little bit more community around it, et cetera. One that a lot of people don't consider, but I think a lot of times when you look at it, it makes a ton of sense is sell and then don't buy another house. Maybe just rent, depending on, what your health situation is and, kind of what life expectancy is. It might be just more feasible to rent a place than to go and buy another house. You can always move into a retirement care community that starts with basic independent living and can go all the way through to, nursing home, et cetera. And then one that I think is fairly common too is ultimately end up living with the family. So you live in a room with your children, sibling, whatever, or someone builds a granny flat that houses an elderly parent so that they're on the property and they can still be a little bit independent, but they're close by. So this housing decision, it's not just strictly a financial decision. In fact, it's probably more importantly, it's a personal decision. So we have to blend both of these into developing that elder care plan when we're talking about, okay, where are we going to live? So let's go to the next slide. So maintaining quality of life is an important consideration when you're aging in place. So, there's a lot of issues to consider. It's like getting around town at home, going out for grocery shopping, going to the doctor, all of those kind of things. It's like, you know, how much mobility are you going to have in your house, and then how are you going to get to all the places you need to go? So transportation is a concern. If you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're 30 miles from the closest grocery store or doctor, that may not be an ideal living situation when you're up there in years. And then obviously there's safety concerns. uh, you know, what kind of flooring do we have? Is it, the potential for slipping and falling? Is the housing been modified to age in place? We'll talk a little bit more about this in another slide, but, do we have grab rails and things like that? Uh, then getting help, whether it's, again, transportation or, people to take you to doctor appointments or coming in and checking on you, cleaning the house, all of that. Again, if you're in the middle of nowhere, it may not be feasible and you may not have as much support. And then finally, the financial costs. Uh, there's a lot of costs that go into maintaining a home, particularly a home that maybe is just too large for your needs. And so, what are the financial implications of maintaining your home and staying in the same home and aging in place? Next slide. So that's the first question we have. And as I just briefly talked about, can you even age in place? How feasible is it for you to stay in that house when you're in your 80s or older, or maybe even younger, but you have health issues? So what is going to be your support network? If you've got family close by or friends close by, maybe it's okay. You'll have people to take you to where you need to go. Is your healthcare providers close by? Can you have things like, say, Meals and Wheels, or adult daycare, things like that? And if so, then maybe you can age in place. And then a lot of times you're going to have to modify the house. If it's a 2-story and all the bedrooms are upstairs, maybe you have to look at, do I put in one of those stair chairs, or do I get some sort of elevator? You gotta modify the bathrooms to put in handrails and grab bars and walk-in showers and stuff like that. Maybe you need ramps to get in and out of the house if you're going to have a walker, you're going to be in a wheelchair. And so then you have to look at, can we do these things? And if so, what's it going to be? What's going to be the cost? Is it just going to be prohibitive to modify your current home, or are you better off looking at going to a home that's going to be more suitable for your stage of life? And again, is it cost effective? If you're going to have a mortgage, you're going to have to continue to pay the mortgage with maybe reduced income. You're going to have to continue to pay property tax and HOA fees, even if the mortgage is paid off. You're going to have to pay for upkeep and repairs. Things are going to go, break. You're going to have plumbing issues. You're going to need to repair roofs, all that. So we have to factor that into the retirement spending plan. Is like, how much are we going to, have to pay to keep living in this house, in addition to the modifications? And then, one thing a lot of people will do is, okay, I'm going to stay in this house. Maybe I can rent out a room or two to someone else who can, A, create a little income to help offset these costs, and B, maybe they can serve as a support system. And so, maybe it's shared living arrangements, things like that. So, there are some options, but all this has got to be evaluated when you're looking into the future. Like, the house you're in today probably, may not be your forever home, because it's just not feasible to stay there. The next slide. So one of the questions we get a lot is, should my house be paid off when I go into retirement? And for most of us on this webinar, it was kind of drummed into us. It's like, yeah, when you retire, your house should be paid off. It's not really the case anymore. The baby boomer generation and even the lower generations, they're comfortable with having debt. A lot of times it's, maybe not the best financial decision to pay off the mortgage. So the first thing is, how's it going to make you feel? Are you going to be happier having a paid for home, knowing that, I still got to pay property tax, et cetera, but my house isn't going to be foreclosed on? Or there are people that are opposite. So great. Okay, my house is paid for, but I don't have a penny in the bank. And if I have some kind of emergency, how am I going to pay for that? So, you know, some people are happier being house rich and cash poor. Other people, it's vice versa. And so, just kind of what is your approach from a behavioral standpoint? And then looking at the financial standpoint, does it make sense to do it or not? And one of the first things we look at is, if we're going to pay off the mortgage, what are we going to use to pay off the mortgage? I mean, if let's say you've got a $250,000 mortgage, if you've got 250,000 sitting around in a money market that up until the last year or so didn't earn anything, it might make sense to pay off a 3.5% mortgage with funds that were only earning 0.5%. Nowadays, the money market may be earning more than the mortgage costs, and so we have to look at that. But if we're going to have to pull it from, say, your IRA, if we're going to need to pull $250,000 from your IRA, that's going to cost you $400,000 because Uncle Sam's going to get a third of that. So we need to look at it both from what's your behavioral approach to having a paid off mortgage, and what is the financial approach to it. Do we have the right assets? Is there a financial benefit to having a paid off mortgage in retirement? Next slide. So here's an example. Let's say it's a $100,000 mortgage. It's a 4% mortgage. So it's costing you $4,000 a year to have that mortgage. If you're itemizing, which is a rarity these days, at least for the next couple of years, probably, your interest cost is really only $3,000, because let's say you're in a 25% tax bracket, we're deducting, $1,000 of that and having that in tax savings. So your rate of return on the interest and savings is either going to be 4% or 3%. So that's the question. Could we get a better return than 3 or 4% in other investments? Today, yes. A couple of years ago, no. It would have made sense to do it. But as I talked about, if we have to take that $100,000 from a IRA because it's your primary asset, now we got to pull $133,000 to get to pay off that mortgage. So now that rate of return on that interest savings is lowered in 2.25. So we can analyze this from a financial standpoint, but that's not the end all be all. It really boils down to what's going to make you, and if you're married and your spouse, if you're both on the same page, more comfortable. It's like having the security of a paid off house or having a security of money in the bank. Next slide. Okay, so another option for aging in place are reverse mortgages, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about this in later parts of the presentation. But I know they have a bad rap, and a lot of times when we tee up the idea of a reverse mortgage, people say no way, and heck, they're a bad idea. That's not the case. When they first came out 30 some odd years ago, there were a lot of different regulations back then, not nearly as many consumer protections, et cetera. They weren't so great. But frankly, they can be a great tool. And again, we don't sell reverse mortgages. We don't make a penny if we recommend them. We have no skin in the game. If we're suggesting looking at it, it's because we think it might be appropriate for you. And so what a reverse mortgage is, it's essentially a mortgage that you don't have to make payments on. So essentially, it's like taking a home equity loan or taking mortgage payments, but you're receiving them rather than making them. So it is a mortgage. It will have to be repaid. In most situations, again, let's say, it was that $100,000 that we need to access. You're going to have a $100,000 mortgage on the home. You don't pay the principal or interest. And so then the interest just accrues. And so the loan grows. Then the loan has to be repaid when either you leave the home because you passed away, or you sell the home, or you have to go into, say, a nursing home. Then the loan becomes due and payable. And so, you're using up your home equity is the way to look at it. But one feature that a lot of people don't understand is it's not like you can ever owe more than the value of your home. You can't be underwater with one of these. And they're not going to loan you so much money that you're going to be underwater from the start. You're generally going to have quite a bit of home equity even when you do one of these. Where you hear people losing their home is that one of the requirements is you have to continue to maintain the home. So you got to pay your property tax, you got to pay your homeowner's insurance, you got to maintain the house. If anybody gets foreclosed these days, it's because they're not making those payments. And generally, they're not going to loan you the money unless you can have the financial wherewithal to support the upkeep of the home. So, next slide. So, there's lots of different ways to use these. One of the ways we use them is if you've got an existing mortgage on your home, we can use a reverse mortgage to pay it off. So you'll still have a mortgage. The difference is you won't have a payment. So again, let's say you've got a $2,000 a month mortgage payment. If we shut that off, now that's $2,000 a month extra you have to spend. Are you using up some of your home equity? Yes, you are. But if you're going to be short $2,000 each month because you have to make a mortgage payment, you're going to be using up something anyway. And so we can use it to pay off an existing mortgage. We can use it to receive monthly income, what they call tenure payments, which is like a pension or Social Security. You can receive payments of your home equity and live off of those. Kind of a unique one is, let's say you're going to do that trade down. I'm going to show you an example how this might work in a future slide. But rather than like selling your house and pocketing 400 and some odd thousand in proceeds and then put it all down on a new house, you can just make say a 20% down payment and have a reverse mortgage on the rest. And so that frees up your cash to be used to live off of or for other purposes. And you just don't have as much home equity. And the one that we like to use quite a bit is just a line of credit. So we don't necessarily take out a huge reverse mortgage up front, but we can use it to protect the portfolio when markets are down. So rather than having to pull something from your portfolio when we have a down market, we just tap into the reverse mortgage line of credit. It's also tax-free, so we can pull money tax-free rather than, say, taking it from your IRA. And so this might be a great way to fund home health care. So we'll talk about in a little bit is tap into a reverse mortgage line of credit to pay for home health care. So next slide. Okay, so now let's talk about trading down. This is what a lot of people want to do. The reality is in Southern California, it's not so easy to do. A lot of times, if you're going to trade down, you're moving out of state, you're moving to a different part of the state, something like that. But this can be an option if you can't or don't want to age in place. So you're going to sell your home and you move. Maybe you're moving to warmer weather, though I don't think that's the issue here. You maybe a lot of times it's moved to be close to your family, so you've got that support network. A lot of people move out of California for tax reasons because we've got the high cost of tax, high cost of living, et cetera. People in other parts of the country, snowbird. We've got clients who live in Phoenix for part of the year and San Diego for part of the year. So you can have multiple homes. It could be lower cost. Obviously, if you're trading down, your property tax could be lower. You may eliminate HOA fees. You may eliminate a mortgage, et cetera. And some people, the reality is, they just don't have the financial wherewithal to not trade down. And so that's obviously a drastic approach, but sometimes that's the approach. So trading down is one of those options, and there's lots of reasons to do it. It's just not so easy to do if you want to stay in the same general area. Well, unless you've built up, a huge amount of home equity and you're going from a very large house to a much smaller house, et cetera. But we can model that if that's something you want to consider. So next slide. So let's talk about the tax consequences of selling the home, because, if you bought your home years or decades ago and you go to sell it, very likely you could potentially have a lot of capital appreciation and you could have some capital gains. So the way selling your home works is your selling price over your cost basis is capital gains. And I've got an example in the next slide. So your cost base is what you originally paid for the house, plus everything you've done to it while you've lived in there. So every time you put a new roof on, or you remodeled the kitchen or the bathrooms, or you've added a patio or any of those kind of things, we add those to the purchase price. Now, nobody keeps track of this. So it's one of those difficulties. We don't expect you to go back and find receipts from 40 years ago, et cetera. So these are one of those things we kind of ballpark when we're preparing tax returns, but we add all those in. And then your selling price is whatever you're selling it for, less your selling costs. So realtor, escrow fees, closing costs, all of that kind of stuff. So, the selling price minus your cost basis equals the capital gains. And each person, so if it's a married couple, you have two of these, you have a $250,000 per person exclusion. So a married couple, you have $500,000 of capital gains you can exclude. Next slide. So the capital gains exclusion, like I said, for one person it's 250, for a married couple it's 500. The rule is you have to have owned and lived in the house for 2 out of 5 years. Not a real onerous rule. And you actually have it available every 2 years. Back in the 90s, you may have been familiar with, you had a one-time exclusion. You had to be over 55, et cetera. But you essentially can trade down a couple times if you want to. As long as you live in it 2 out of 5 years, then you would have another exclusion the next house you sell. So it's not a one-time thing like it used to be. So let's go to the next slide, and I think I have an example of how this would work. All right, so let's say you have a house worth $750,000. You paid $375,000 for it, and your gain exclusion is $250,000. So if you're a single person, you'd have $125,000 of capital gains. Capital gains gets a favorable tax rate, anywhere from 0 up to 23.8, at least at the federal level. California does not have a capital gains rate, so unfortunately, you're going to pay whatever your ordinary rate is. So this example, on 125,000, we're going to have to pay 18,750 of capital gains tax, and then we're going to have to pay California 11,825 because the typical rate's 9.3. So we're essentially have a total tax of $30,000 on this trade down example. So now the next slide, I think, is the one that has how the numbers work. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we sold it for $750,000. We've got to pay realtors and escrow companies and all that, so we lose $45,000. We had a mortgage of $250,000. We pay off the mortgage. We have to pay our capital gains tax. So from that $750,000, we have costs of $325,000. So we walk away with $424,000. So then the equation is, okay, can we go buy something for $424,000 if we want to pay cash? Maybe it's feasible, maybe it's not. Again, depends on where you're going. But the other option would be, okay, we're going to put a $424,000 down payment, and we're going to have some mortgage, or we're going to put some number down and have a reverse mortgage. And so there's lots of different ways to do it. But what most people consider is, I'm going to sell it. Whatever I walk away with, that's what I want to pay for the new house. $424,000 would be, the example here. That may or may not be enough to accomplish what you want to do. Next slide. Okay, so as I just talked about, a lot of people, the goal is, again, it depends on whether you want that paid for house. I'm just going to pay cash for the new house, and I know I've got security. What kind of financial situation does that leave you in terms of liquidity? Do you want to carry a mortgage in retirement? Can we do a reverse mortgage if you're comfortable with a mortgage? And as I mentioned before, do you even need to buy a home? Maybe you just take that $424,000 and you live off of it and you rent someplace. Because maybe at some point you're going to have to go into assisted living or a nursing home, or maybe you're going to have to move closer to the kids or whatever. And so consider renting instead of buying. Next slide, and we talk about that a little bit more. So, it frees up cash for future living expenses. Again, it depends. If you're depending on where you're renting, it may be more expensive than your mortgage was if you have a mortgage, but it provides you flexibility and mobility for life changes. Again, maybe if you're going to do the snowbird thing, renting 2 different places is the way to go. Again, if you're going to go into a nursing home in the near future, you might be better off renting. The downsides, costs are unknown. If you have a mortgage or a paid for house, you know what your costs are going to be. So you could have rent increases, etc. there's no security. You could lose your lease and get kicked out, and rent payments never end. But again, it just, we have to kind of model that. It may be the most cost effective and flexible way for you to do it. Just a lot of people don't think about it. It's never like one of the options. And I think it's something a lot of people should consider. Um, and again, if you're going to move out of, say, Southern California and some other place, renting can be very affordable. And so it might be the way to go. We can model that in your spending plan to see if that makes sense for you or not. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of housing, you've got to make the age and place decision. What do you want to do? Is this your forever home? You want to stay there as long as you possibly can? If so, are we going to pay off the mortgage? Are we going to do a reverse mortgage? What are the costs going to be? What are we going to have in terms of carrying costs, modification costs, all that? If we're going to trade down to maybe a smaller, more affordable house, more reasonable house, where are we going to do that? How much cash would we have? Again, are we going to pay cash? Are we going to have a mortgage? Are we going to maybe do a reverse mortgage? Or, should we evaluate renting versus buying? So, the decision first is, do we want to stay in this home? And if so, what that look like financially and emotionally versus, no, we want to sell the house. Where do we want to go? What's that look like financially, emotionally, et cetera? So now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about healthcare. So obviously, housing is one of the biggest decisions. The next one is going to be healthcare, particularly in your later years. So medical expenses, and we're going to talk a lot about long-term care, and that's where you hear all the scare stories and stuff. But just plain old medical expenses can be catastrophic to your finances if you don't have proper healthcare. For example, a triple bypass surgery these days can cost $400,000 if you don't have the right coverage. And even if you say have pretty good coverage, that still could be $25,000 to $50,000 out of pocket potentially. And the big unknown is you don't know what your healthcare needs are going to be. So you don't know if you're going to have diseases that are going to need treatment and care. You don't know if you're going to have health events that require assisted living, nursing home health care, et cetera. So, from smart financial planning, we want to insure these large risks. So having proper health insurance in retirement and in your later years is critical. And, if you're on Medicare, then having a good Medicare supplement can help alleviate a lot of these costs. And so, make the right choices when it comes to, your Medicare supplement and your Medicare. One thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that Medicare, it may cover the bulk of, most medical expenses. It's not going to cover hardly anything in terms of long-term care. It will cover a little bit of rehabilitation after you've spent some time in a hospital, but that's very limited. It's not going to cover a nursing home or assisted living or anything like that. So, we've got to pay close attention to what your healthcare coverage is going to look like in your elder care plan. So next slide. So, choosing the right coverage for you, there are a couple things that come into play here. One is what's your mindset in terms of healthcare, and then also what's your health outlook. So, how do you normally use healthcare? And then, what's your overall health outlook and what's the prognosis for needing healthcare in the future? So next slide. So, the first thing we looked at is what's your healthcare spending mindset? So, we kind of can break people down into minimizers or maximizers. Are you one of those people that says, I haven't been to a doctor in, 10 years. I rarely, if ever, go to the doctor. Or are you the person that goes, I go for my annual checkups. I get all the vaccines. I do all the tests. So kind of what's your approach to healthcare? A lot of people are kind of in between, but the amount of coverage you want to use is going to vary based on how much you're going to use it. Are you comfortable with technology? Now they have these teledoc services and things like that that can save money. Other people like, I want to go see a real doctor in a doctor's office, etc. And then there are people that are like, they're more holistic. It's like, I'm going to use acupuncture, I'm going to use chiropractic, I'm going to use home remedies, etc. So you kind of look at what's your approach to healthcare in general. And then obviously, if you're married, your spouse could have a totally different approach than you do. But these are the kind of things we have to factor in when making the decision about what kind of health coverage do we want to have going forward. Next slide. And so then we want to look at what's your approach to healthcare, but then also let's take a realistic look at your health. What do you do to take care of it? Do you exercise a lot? Do you eat healthy? Reduce stress? All of that kind of stuff. What's your family health history? You could take care of yourself great and exercise consistently and all that, but if you have bad genetics, then it may not help you. I'm a prime example of that. I mean, I've been a lifelong runner. Run half marathons, all that kind of stuff. On my dad's side, everybody died of colon or stomach cancer. On my mom's side, everybody had heart issues and died very early from heart issues. So, I've got, bad luck on my side. So I have to do everything I can to kind of mitigate that family health history. On the other hand, my wife, her parents are 94. They're in pretty good health. All of her aunts and uncles, and grandparents all lived in their 90s. So, she's got good genes on her side. But you got to take that into consideration. And then you got to look at lifestyle. Do you smoke? Do you drink? Have you smoked? All of those kind of things. How's your eating habits? Are you very sedentary? And then, do you have existing health conditions? Do you have diabetes? Is there the potential for cancer, heart disease, all of those kind of things? So obviously, that will make a big difference on what kind of healthcare coverage you need. Because if we know you're going to have some issues in the future, then we've got a plan for that. Next slide. So then let's shift gears and talk a little bit about long-term care. As I mentioned, Medicare does not cover this. And so the insurance company nationwide does a survey every single year. And essentially, 3/4 of the people they surveyed said they're concerned they won't be able to pay for long-term care. We're going to talk about the numbers in a sec. So 3/4 were concerned, but also 3/4 of them didn't have any kind of plan. And the reality is, like 1/5 of the elderly population have some kind of long-term care coverage, which has led to issues in terms of what you have available to you on the insurance front in the future. So next slide. So long-term care planning, it's not just, hey, I'm going in a nursing home. I mean, that's like the end of a continuum. I mean, generally, it's going to start with, you're going to need some kind of limited support at home. You're going to need someone to maybe come in and clean the house and do daily chores, buy groceries, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you're going to sign up for Meals on Wheels and have meals delivered to your house. So you're going to need some kind of limited support. Maybe you have to have nurses come in and change catheters or whatever it is. So you might need some limited health functions. And then the next step up is home health care. So you've got some issues that need to be taken care of by a professional. Maybe there's certain daily living functions you can't do. So you got to have someone come in and do those. Or maybe it's adult daycare, things like that. So obviously there's more cost with this because now you're dealing with more than just, say, a house cleaner. You're dealing with, healthcare professionals, et cetera, physical therapists, all those kind of things. And so, there's additional costs with home health care. This one also is where the family member strain starts to come in because a lot of times it's a family member that's going to have to do these things. They're maybe the ones that are going to have to come over and, cook the food or, bathe adults or whatever it is, take them to doctor's appointment. So, there's there's now strain on family members when this comes into play. Next would be now you're going to some sort of assisted living facility where it's not a full blown nursing home, but you can't live independently. You need professional health care on a more permanent basis. And then finally, the last resort for everybody is the nursing home. Generally, that's dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. And so, the costs increase as you go across that spectrum. And usually, those first two, a lot of it's going to fall on family members to do these, um, if all possible. And then ultimately, there's going to be a financial burden because you just need professional assistance up through a nursing home. So, next slide. So, one thing that's fairly new, and I've used this in a couple situations, it can be very helpful, is to have a family member, um, or, if this is your own personal elder plan, to hire a geriatric care manager. So these are professionals. They're typically nurses. Sometimes they're social workers or gerontologists, but they coordinate all their healthcare. So like they can make the doctor appointments. They can, you know, research and negotiate with the various living arrangements, things like that. Coordinate with in home nurse visits and all of that kind of stuff. Attend doctor visits with the person. Um, they're not free, so that's one of those costs. But they can lighten the load of the family member so that you don't have a family member who's essentially taking a bunch of time off or quitting their job to do all this for their parents or whatever. Um, you know, look at if there's the financial wherewithal to hire a geriatric care manager to essentially be the quarterback of the health plan. Like we're the quarterback of your financial plan. These geriatric care managers can be the quarterback of your health plan and coordinate medical benefits and all of that kind of stuff. So it's something to consider evaluating as part of the elder care plan. Next. So now let's talk about long-term care costs in California. And this is these numbers are pretty scary. So today the average nursing home cost is about $8,000 a month. The average stay is about 3 years. Now, some people are there much shorter. Some people are there much longer. I had a neighbor of mine who had a stroke when he was like 46 years old. He was in a nursing home for 25 years before he passed away. So, there are those kind of exceptions. But in general, we're looking at, when we're stress testing your plan, like, okay, about 8,000 a month for maybe 3 years. What does that do to your financial, your plan, et cetera? If you need home health care, again, non-skilled, so you don't necessarily need a nurse or a doctor. That's looking at $31 to $38 per hour. If you need skilled home health care, that's usually like $300 a day. So if you've got a nurse that's there, most of the day, and it's coming and changing catheters or whatever it is, that's like $300 a day. If you go to adult daycare, so the family member's got to work, and so they can't take care of their parent all day. So you could use adult daycare. That could be anywhere from 1,400 to 4,000, again, depending on what the needs are. If they need some kind of skilled healthcare, obviously now you're looking at 4,000 a month versus 1,400 if it's just more day-to-day living stuff. So you got to consider these costs in your spending plan, and then you also got to consider the cost to the family members, who a lot of times this falls on, particularly the female family members, in terms of lost wages, giving up careers, stress, all of those kind of things. So I know this is like one of the biggest concerns a lot of people have is like, I don't want to be a burden to my kids. And so the way to get around that is to have this plan in place, figure out how we're going to pay for these costs, so that we're not relying on our kids to take care of us in those later years. Next slide. So financing long-term care, several different ways to do it. Most commonly, it's self-insuring, meaning you're just going to pay out of pocket. And if we don't do any other kind of planning, that's the default plan. I mean, you don't have any other options. There are standalone long-term care policies. There are also what are called hybrid long-term care policies. There's life insurance with long-term care riders. So those are the insurance options. As I talked about, a reverse mortgage can be a way to insure those particularly home health care costs. And then a lot of times it's like, I'm going to self-insure, and then ultimately I got to sell the house. I'm going to go to a nursing home. My house is my last major asset. I'm going to sell the home. And I think a lot of people don't realize that Medicaid, which does pay for home health care, is not an option. I mean, to essentially go on the Medicaid in most situations, you're essentially destitute. You're allowed to have a couple $1,000s of assets. If you're a married couple, you can keep your home, etc. But then when the surviving spouse passes away, Medicaid's got to be repaid, etc. So we're not going to rely on Medicaid. If that's going to be the default, then we're not doing our job. So we got a lot of options in terms of financing long-term care. Next slide. So again, this is the default. If you don't have a plan, you still have a plan. You're going to pay out of pocket. So we're going to use our nest egg to pay these costs out of pocket. Ideally, we've saved for this and pre-funded it, and we actually have an insurance fund. And we have to stress test the plan for probability of success. It's one of the things we do when we're running your spending plans, is we're constantly testing for what happens if one or both of you have to go into a nursing home. What is that going to do to your plan? Where's the money going to come from? And again, I talked about earlier, like paying off the mortgage, if you have to use your IRA to pay those costs, Uncle Sam's going to get a third of that. So that just increases the costs, and then it causes a spiral. And a lot of times the ultimate plan is, okay, if I have to go to a nursing home, that's when I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to tap into my home equity. And then, that's, kind of the final option. And I'm seeing lots of good questions, so we will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. So next slide. So in terms of insurance, I think the one most people think of is what we call standalone long-term care. So this is, you pay a premium, and then it pays a monthly benefit up to whatever the dollar limit is. And it's, once you've met you can't do 2 of the 5, daily living activities, then the standalone long-term care kicks in. A lot of them, you have cost of living adjustments, so they increase. A lot of them, particularly the newer ones, will pay for home health care. It's something you want to look at when we're evaluating the policy, is like, most people want to have home health care. They don't want to go to a nursing home. And so, will it pay for home health care? So it's the most focused and complete coverage because it's designed to pay for long-term care. Obviously, the earlier you purchase it, the lower the potential premiums are going to be. Now, I used to work for an insurance company, 25 years ago. Back then, the premiums were pretty much fixed. And so you could, assure yourself, okay, this is the premium and it's not going to go up. As I'm going to talk about in a sec, that's not the case anymore. So in terms of the cons, and there's a lot of them, and it's the reason we don't necessarily use these anymore. First, it's use it or lose it. So it's just like your homeowners and your auto policies. You pay all these premiums for 20, 25 years, then you end up not going to a nursing home. You pass away from an illness or whatever. You paid all that money and you didn't get any benefit from it. Now, like I said, it's the same as auto and home. You're glad you have it if you need it, but if you don't need it, you regret, well, I paid all that money and I didn't use it. The biggie now is premium increases are creating funding uncertainty. The whole idea with this is to fund a potential risk. And now the risk is these insurance companies, because they didn't know how to price this stuff, keep increasing the rates on these policies. So if they weren't like paid for 10 years or something like that, they're jacking up the rates because they're not making any money off of these policies, which has led to a lot of carriers just getting out of the business altogether. There's very few carriers that are even in the standalone long-term care market anymore. The ones that do, for example, Genworth used to be the biggest long-term care product provider. They've hit big-time financial troubles. They're asking for increases of 50% or more, or they're giving you the option to, okay, we won't increase your premium, but we're going to reduce your benefits. And so, now you're getting to that age where you need this, and maybe you can't afford the premiums anymore. And so you don't have any certainty around what this coverage is going to do for you. And obviously, the older you sign up for this, the higher the rates are going to be, and you still have to be insurable. So if you're already having like early Alzheimer's or something like that, you're not going to be able to even get coverage. So very rarely do we recommend these anymore. If people have them, we evaluate, is it the right coverage? And a lot of times anymore, it's evaluating, should you take the rate increase or should you reduce the coverage, et cetera. But these are not the ideal vehicle to insure long-term care costs. So next slide. Next, which we think is a far better option, but has some cons available to it, is what's called a hybrid long-term care policy. So technically, this is a life insurance policy that pays long-term care benefits. The difference is there's very little life insurance to it. And I'll give you an example of one we used a few years ago on the next slide. So it's primarily long-term care, but it does pay a small death benefit. And the other thing you can do with this is you can cash it in if you don't need it. So you're going to receive a benefit from the policy one way or the other. It's not use it or lose it. If you need long-term care, it's there to provide long-term care. If you don't need long-term care, your heirs get a death benefit. Or if you don't need it anymore, then you can cash it in and use the cash. The premium structure provides certainty too, because most of these are either one single premium or they're like 5 years of payments. And so you have premium certainty. So from a pure insurance standpoint, this is a much more preferable vehicle than a standalone long-term care policy. The benefits are very similar. It'll pay for home health care. You have cost of living increases, all that kind of stuff. Here's the cons. You still need to be insurable. And yes, it's a life insurance policy, but they're not going to underwrite it for life insurance. Like I said, the death benefit is minimal above what you pay in premiums. They're going to underwrite it for the potential for long-term care. So you have to be insurable. The older you are, the more you're going to pay in rates because the insurance company doesn't have time to invest the money and recoup the cost. And really the biggest is you've got to have the funds to pay it. As I mentioned, it's usually a single premium, which means you need to have a lump sum. So where this can really come into play is if you've got idle cash, you've got money sitting in a savings account or a CD, or you've got, say, a regular life insurance policy that has cash value in it, something like that. We can use that to make that lump sum premium. And now we've got, long-term care insurance that's fully funded, and we know exactly what we're going to get, and then we can plan around that coverage. So next slide. So this is an example. This is one of my clients from a few years ago. So these numbers are probably maybe not as good today because rates have gone up. But this was a 63-year-old female. She had $40,000 in a CD, which at the time was earning 0.25% or something. So it was essentially idle cash. So that $40,000 bought her a death benefit of $60,218, or it would pay her $2,500 a month for 6 years, up to $180,000 in long-term care benefits, or she could cash it out at any time and get $32,000 back. So if she needed long-term care, she get $2,500 a month for 6 years. Now, is that going to fully cover long-term care? No, it's not, but it will help fund it. And maybe it's enough for some home health care, et cetera. If she doesn't need long-term care, then her daughter would receive a $60,000 death benefit on that $40,000 single premium. So, if you look at what the rate of return on that is, it's maybe only a couple percent. But that couple percent was still better than what she was getting in the CD. Or if we needed to, she could just cash it out and use the $32,000. So there's some benefits to this. Unless you've got just a ton of idle cash sitting around, you're probably not going to be able to fully fund all of your long-term care needs, but you can certainly help partially fund this and, then come up with how are we going to fund the rest, as needed. So next slide. So the next one is life insurance for the long-term care rider. This is going to be more practical for those of you that are in your 50s and 60s, more so than say in your 70s. So this is a regular old life insurance policy. But what it does, it adds a rider that says we can accelerate the death benefit um, if you need long-term care. So, you're buying long-term, you're buying life insurance, but let's say it's $100,000 policy. The policy may say if you have, you can't do 2 of 5 activities of daily living, then you are able to accelerate up to $80,000 the death benefit to pay for long-term care costs. And then whatever's left would go to your heirs as life insurance. Most of these don't have any kind of upfront costs. It's just you've got the life insurance premium. So if you have both the life insurance and long-term care need, these can work really well. The downside to this one, because it is primarily life insurance, they're going to underwrite you as life insurance. So if you've got diabetes or heart disease or something, you may not be able to get one of these. Obviously, the older you are, the higher the premiums you are. You may be paying for life insurance you don't need. And the benefits may not be as rich as they are with the others. But I think this life insurance or long-term care rider or the hybrid life insurance, if we're going to be able to insure, those are probably the 2 ways we're going to do it. Standalone long-term care policies, access is so limited these days, the premiums are so high that they just aren't cost effective. We're better off coming up with a different approach. Next. So now the other is again, back to the reverse mortgage. So what we can do here is if, let's say you need home health care, or if you're married and one of you has to go into a nursing home, you can tap into your home equity and stay in the home. So you can receive those payments or you can use a line of credit. So let's say you've got $500,000 or $600,000 of home equity. You may be able to get a reverse mortgage line of credit for say $300,000, and you can use that $300,000 to pay for home health care or nursing home or whatever. And yeah, the loan's going to continue to grow, so it accrues. So you're decreasing your ultimate legacy. But the reality is, if you're going to need home health care or nursing home, you're going to have to pay for it somehow. And so, yeah, you're spending your home equity, but that's probably better than spending your IRA, which has tax consequences. This is tax-free. And you don't have to repay the reverse mortgage until you either sell the house or you move out. And again, you can never own more than the value of your home. So again, this is another option. Usually what we're looking at is, ideally self-insuring some amount or insuring some amount and then using this as to cover any shortfalls. So the downsides, as I mentioned, you are going to use up your legacy in your home. You're going to have to use up something anyway if you're going to be outlaying $6,000-7,000 a month in nursing home or home health care costs anyway. And it only works while you remain in the home. So if you're a single person and you have to go into a nursing home or assisted living, the mortgage is going to become due. So it's maybe not practical. But at that point, you would sell the home and then you would have whatever equities left. If you're a married couple, one of you goes into a nursing home, the other one can continue to live in the home and still have access to the reverse mortgage. So again, it's just another tool in the toolbox, just like the insurance vehicles are. So lots of different ways and combinations to fund those long-term care costs. Next slide. So then let's kind of look at it in terms of that healthcare use, et cetera. So we kind of built a grid here, a quadrant. And so at the top left there, we have, you use healthcare a lot. So you go to lots of doctor visits for checkups and all that, and you're unhealthy. So if we look at that a couple ways, you're going to spend more on healthcare. A, because you're unhealthy, and B, because you just use healthcare. But more than likely, if you're unhealthy, you're going to have lower longevity. So we don't necessarily have to plan for extended stays in a nursing home. So maybe we make an assumption to start of, if you go into one, it's going to be for 2 years rather than 6 or 7 years. On the other end, you could be unhealthy, but you don't use healthcare a lot. So, you're still going to have the same lower longevity. You're still going to have the same lower potential stay in a nursing home, et cetera. but your healthcare costs might be a little more reasonable because you're just not using the doctor as much. Maybe you're going to have higher deductibles and copays and things like that. And then in the bottom, you use healthcare a lot, but you're healthy. So in that case, we're going to assume longer longevity. And we're also going to assume that because you're going to live longer, the possibility of Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that is going to be higher. And so you're probably going to estimate we're going to have you stay longer in a nursing home, 3+ years, and you're going to have higher health costs. So we can kind of plug in numbers into the spending plan. And then you don't use healthcare much, but you're healthy. Again, your stay in say a nursing home or assisted living is going to be longer because you have longer longevity and you're healthier. But maybe again, you're saving some money on healthcare costs because you're going to have higher copays and deductibles and all that. So again, we can kind of break everybody into these quadrants as a starting point for modeling and stress testing. What your healthcare costs are going to be in retirement. So next slide. So kind of thinking through your end of life decisions too. So we're going to kind of shift gears and kind of wrap this up. So, let's say you have cancer and you have a 90% chance of dying. So the doctor just told you, is like, look, the prognosis is not good. What's your approach? Are you going to go out and call hospice and get that set up? Or are you going to say, you know what, I'm going to fight this with everything I have because I could be one of that 10%. So, what is your view of these end of life decisions? And what is going to be your approach to making these decisions? Next slide. So other considerations, again, we've talked about aging in place, but something that's really important as you get into your later years is to avoid what we call the dwindles. And you probably all, know somebody who this has happened to. They've retired, they're not socially active, they don't have a big network of friends or family, so they sit at home and they watch TV all day. And what happens is their mental and physical health declines, which means that now, they're more likely to have to go into assisted living or nursing home, or they're going to have health events. So, as you develop your elder care plan, one of the things you want to do is like, okay, what activities do I want to do? What passions do I have? What networks do I have, involved in meetup groups or Facebook groups or, community groups or whatever to stay active to avoid this. And the other thing you want to put into your elder care plan is, what about your four-legged family members? What's going to be the plan for who's going to take care of the cat or the dog or the dogs? Do we need to designate a caregiver, or some situations we actually create a trust for the support of the pet, all of that kind of stuff. So, if you've got these, furry family members, they've got to be built into the elder care plans. Like, okay, what's going to happen to, the pup when I can't take care of him any longer? Next slide. So the kind of the last thing we want to touch on is, okay, we've talked about living arrangements, we've talked about healthcare. The last one is your estate plan. And so it's really critical to make sure that all of your estate documents are up to date. And obviously, as we do your year-end reviews, we're looking at all these kind of things to make sure. But is your financial power of attorney holders up to date? Are these the people that you want to pay all your bills if you're incapacitated because you have dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever? Is your healthcare directive up to date? Have you specified and communicated what you want in terms of life support and organ donation and cremation and all that? The will and the living trust, is everything funded the way it's supposed to be? Are the beneficiaries up to date? And most importantly, have you communicated this to your family members? Do you have a list of all of your documents? And if you're working financial planning with us, obviously we have your vault in your financial plan where all this can be stored. But you want to have everything organized so that when the time comes where you can't really do these things on your own, someone can take over and know exactly what to do. Next slide. So in terms of putting together your elder care plan, we've got a plan for those healthcare and long-term care expenses. We need to stress test your spending plan for these health events. Um, we need to think through your medical decisions, in terms of what do you want for healthcare, all that. We have to figure out how we're going to fund long-term care and home health care. We got to make sure every year your state documents are up to date, beneficiaries are up to date, et cetera. You've got to build your social capital so you don't get those dwindles in your later years. And then you need to pretty much write this out. And again, we can help you with this. Specify, this is where I want to live. These are the things I want to have. These are my wishes, all of that. And communicate it to your loved ones so they're clear about what you want. So you can be in control of this rather than family members fighting over ultimately, what's going to happen to you, when are they going to move you into a nursing home, when are they going to sell the house, all of those kind of things. Again, if this is just for your personal use, and again, you don't wait till your 70s to do this. Start thinking about it, in your 60s and developing the plan. Or if this is for your parents, certainly we can help you think through, what you should be doing for your parents, et cetera. So I think we're ready for questions. I don't think I had another slide. Yep. So I know we had some questions, so let's go ahead and look at those and answer them. Okay, so we had a question. For long-term care, can we use an irrevocable trust to shelter assets? That used to be the case. So we could do some kind of estate planning. You can give away assets to qualify for Medicaid. Again, you've got to give away so much that you're essentially destitute. But the look back period is now 5 years rather than 3. So if you're going to give stuff away, you got to do it well in advance of actually needing any kind of Medicaid coverage. And there are not penalties for financial planners and attorneys, et cetera, to try and do this kind of planning. So we have to tread very lightly. But if we're planning near enough or far enough into the out in the future, certainly there's things we can do with gifting strategies, et cetera, to transfer assets, but it's really difficult to qualify for Medicaid. We're probably better off planning to figure out how we're going to fund those home health care events. Medicaid is kind of like the last resort. Again, you got to plan essentially five years out before you're going to have any benefit. Any other questions from the group? Obviously, if you do, you can reach out to me, Jim at anchorbaycapital.com, or Blake at anchorbaycapital.com, and we're more than happy to discuss it. You want to come in and start working on your Eldercare plan, just reach out to us and we'll get you on the calendar. This will be it's been recorded and it will be posted to our website in the next week or so if you want to go back and listen to it again. And we appreciate you guys coming out this evening. And we'll the next newsletter will announce our next monthly webinar. And we'll talk to everybody soon. Thanks, guys. Good night.